Welcome to the Penny Z Show, where you get to learn how real people overcame real issues. Get ready to take notes and, most importantly, take action. Here's your host, Penny Z.
Welcome to the Penny Z Show, the show where we're focusing on transforming lives one day at a time with topics that are real, relatable, and relevant. I have a special guest on with me today. I've known Chuck for well over 2 years, and he is actually a special mentor and coach for me. I don't know why this isn't going away. There we go. Mentor and coach for me through a special Life and Air organization that allows me to do personal and professional development. So I'm excited to have Chuck on. We, just as all of you remember, we are doing a series called the Less Than series. And that is at some point in time in our life, we have felt less than. We have felt less than for a particular moment in time, a particular season in time, or for some of us like myself, we've felt less than all of our life. We've not felt pretty enough, athletic enough, smart enough, tall enough, whatever that might be. And so we all have a story that is relatable. So I'm excited to have Chuck on the show today, and I'm going to let him give you a little bit of his bio and his background. Hi, Chuck.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yeah, I'm always struggled to give my background a little bit. I've had a very wide and varied background, I think is fair. And I've been successful in a number of different things over the course of my life. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a decorated combat veteran. I have a lot of certifications in a lot of different business fields. I'm a lean sensei. I was black belt in Six Sigma. A lot of things that nobody on the call really cares about, probably. I think the most significant thing I'm proud of, and the thing that is relevant most to the people that will listen to this podcast, is probably that I've been an executive coach for a long time. And I've been a life coach for probably the last 6 or 7 years of my life exclusively. And I love that work. And that work has provided me many, many opportunities for my own growth and to witness the growth of a lot of others. So I think that's probably as much as most people care.
Well, and I have to say I'm very blessed because hopefully you consider one of me as one of your students that has actually grown and learned and have moved on in my life. And so I want to thank you for being a part of my world and being a part of my personal growth over the last 2+ years, because it's really made a difference for me. And it's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So thank you very much. And again, it's exciting to have you on your show. So as we talked about early, one of the things that I'm really delving into that I found out for myself, and I shared with the audience my story, was how all of us in some way, shape, or form have a less than story. Even people that are very successful in the world, to obviously very important stay-at-home moms, to athletes, to famous, to non-famous individuals. And so if you will just we're just going to delve in, Chuck, and have you start with what you feel in your life has been one of the stories that you can share with us that you would consider less than.
You know, it's interesting, Penny. I personally have come to believe that the more successful a person is, generally, that in many, many ways, they're driven to success by the feeling of being less than in their life. And so when I look at people who become actors, people who become very great musicians, people who spend tremendous amounts of time in the gym to become professional athletes, people that are driven to the top of almost any industry in any way that I've ever known, have all been driven there by a feeling of being less than at some point in their life. So when you say that most people feel less than, I would say that everyone feels less than, that everyone has a less than story. And I feel like part of my success is because of that same thing. I feel like I've been driven since a young age to prove that I was, quote, worthy or enough, or however you want to put that. And, you know, when you asked me to come on the show, when you sent me the invitation, I was very honored. And I've thought a lot about where that comes from in my own life. And I don't believe for me personally, it comes from any single traumatic event. I know many students that I talk with, and people that I talk with about this have a very specific story about when they believe that feeling came. But for me, I grew up in a very supportive household. And the only thing I can say is that I learned to be competitive at a very young age. And competition in and of itself is not necessarily bad, but it's always about comparison. And I will share with you a quick story, just as an example of how that competitiveness leads to that feeling that you're not quite what you need to be yet. I remember in high school, I played basketball, and I had a really good game, a triple-double in today's terms, probably my best game ever. And I can remember very vividly that everything I did that night went perfect. Like no-look passes, couldn't miss a shot. Everything I did went well. And at the end of the night, my competitive nature was to pick up the stat sheet and look at it. And what I remember most vividly about that evening was I had 2 unforced errors. I had 2 turnovers that were unforced. And for me, that's what I was looking for. The game was over. For me personally, even at that young age, I was the kind of person who I put a check mark beside it. It was a great game. I knew that, but that's not what I was looking for. When I looked at the stat sheet, I was looking for what could I have done better. And that mindset of always just looking for the downside so that I knew what I had to work on creates the kind of drive that in some ways can make you successful in the area that you're driven to. But when you look at life in general, as I got older, I began to realize that feeling of incomplete attainment of every goal affects you in a lot of ways. And it's funny, today I have the privilege of coaching a lot of people that are successful. And I had lunch with a national speaker, someone that people would call a guru, people that I'm not a name dropper. I'm not going to throw him under the bus here, but he's a very successful national speaker. We flew into town to speak at a large conference and wanted to have lunch with me. And it's funny, I knew I had this interview today. I didn't even bring it up. And as we were sitting there just having a general discussion about what's going on in his life, he mentioned that, he still struggles with the feeling of being an imposter.
Interesting.
And I know you and I have had this conversation about the similarities between feeling like you're an imposter is really just the same way of saying that you feel less than. And right. He said, it's funny, Chuck. I love having lunch with you because you treat me like a, quote, normal person, but everywhere else I go now, I have this following and these people put me on a pedestal. And he said, every day I wake up and think one day the imposter police are going to knock on the door and they're going to walk in and say, I'm sorry, but we have to take all this stuff. You're not this good. And, we had a long conversation yesterday at lunch from about his feelings of feeling like he's just not enough, that he's less than what he wants to be. And, this is a person that anyone else in the world will look to and say, he has it all together. He has a great life. He travels. He makes tons of money. He doesn't work hard. He has a great relationship with his wife. His life's in good shape. But he still struggles with that feeling of feeling less than. And I find for myself, personally, that's exactly where my less than story my less than issue, whatever you want to call it. That's where I feel like my struggles are in my life, or that feeling is constant for me too. I always feel like I'm not quite good enough to have the life that I have, that somehow I've not really been good enough to obtain the certifications I have, to not really get any of the accolades. And even when someone says something nice about me like you did, to start this off, there's still a feeling in the back of my head that says, if she only knew who you really were, she wouldn't say those nice things. So those feelings of feeling less than, I think, they exist. And at the same time, I know that what you said about me was true. And I know that I've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people to change their lives. I know I've had a positive impact on the world. I know that I've earned the right to say that I ran a half Ironman, that I've ran Tough Mudders and all the other things I've done. I know that no one else did that. But I think that feeling that we get of not being enough limits what we can really, it puts a lid on our lives that we really need to learn how to take off. And I think for me, it's still a daily struggle. I wouldn't call it the kind of struggle I had when I was younger, because I do feel like I've come to grips with the fact that I have earned some of this. And I also feel like I'm very, excuse me, I feel like I have a lot of gratitude for the blessings in my life that I feel like really are, I have a great life, and I'm very, very grateful for what I have. And I try to live up to that gratitude, I think, every day.
Mm-hmm.
But, so I don't know if I actually answered your question or not.
Well, you did. And actually, it's been interesting because I've been doing other interviews with other guests. And it seems like, for the most part, the topics of conversation have been around a particular event or something where someone experienced a feeling of less than, was able to overcome it, and then move forward. And I know that's one of my experiences and one of my less than stories.
Right.
But I'm actually excited to hear and happy to hear, because not every story finishes. Not every story is not ongoing in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And the fact that you've brought that up within you, could you share a little bit about what that is in your life, and some of the lessons, or maybe some of the steps that you take to minimize that? Because basically it's a self-confidence level or a self-esteem level, or not comparing yourself when you're looking at your story, if I'm correct. And so
Yep.
Can you share with us how, on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, your mindset and working with that might be something for our viewers and for yourself that's more ongoing?
So I do two things with my feelings of not being less than. Number one, I use it to fuel what I want. I try to turn that into a positive energy, and I try to realistically look at let's just take a certain aspect of my life. Say I want to be better physically. I know where I am physically relative to the rest of the world, but I can use that energy of feeling not enough and turn it into a positive thing and use it to drive my behavior, with some modification of how I feel about that. I feel like that's one of the things I do. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I've learned to do, and I think you've heard me use this term, is I created a cookie jar. And I wish I could say this was my idea, but I stole it from David Goggins, who's a former Navy SEAL and an ultra marathoner that I happen to follow. And I created a cookie jar, and my cookie jar is electronic. I put in that cookie jar all the good things that I've done, all those certifications that I actually have earned. I put the certificate in there. when I do something good, I make a copy of that and I stick it in that cookie jar. When you send me a thank you and say, Chuck, you helped me do something, and it's something that really moves me in that moment, I don't just read it, I put it away in that cookie jar. And I use that cookie jar to start to remind me that I am enough and that I am worthy and that I have done a lot of good things and that I have survived a lot of things. I have a picture of myself with General Schwarzkopf from the Gulf War in my cookie jar. I have emails from students in my cookie jar. I have a letter from a lady who's never met me, but I helped her husband and she thinks I saved their marriage. I have that in my cookie jar. So on the day when I feel less than, when I feel like an imposter, when I have those feelings and I can't just turn them into energy, when they're actually affecting my mindset, which I don't like, I will go into the cookie jar. And I don't have a better term for it. I kind of like the thought of a cookie jar. I feel like mentally what I do is just take the top off. I reach in there, just randomly pull out a cookie, and I look at it and I say to myself, oh yeah, I forgot about that good day, and I forgot about this good day, and oh yeah, I forgot I did that, and I did that. And it just reminds me that I have a 100% success rate of getting up the next day and surviving. Like so far, I'm 100%.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so that, to me, that's what the cookie jar does for me. It reminds me of who I am. I'll tell you another, I have the honor and privilege of being coached by a guy named Jack Lanham, who's a 13th degree Kung Fu Grandmaster. And he took me through an exercise one day where he said, you don't really know who you are. And I said, oh, I think I do. And he was like,
sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I think you've had me do this exercise.
He said, I don't think you do. And, I feel like I'm very self-aware compared to maybe most of the population. I feel like I know what my strengths are. I know what my weaknesses are. I know what my tendencies are. I'm smart enough to know that I'm not completely objective about my own behavior, but I feel like I recognize that and try to account for it. So, and I said all that to Jack, and Jack said to me, no, I believe all that. I believe you're very self-aware. What I don't think you understand is who you are. So he said, he asked me questions like, how many people your age make more than you? I said, I don't know. So he takes me to a website where I can type that in and find out where I rank in the world in terms of income. And then he typed in my overall wealth, and we looked at where I am overall in the world in terms of wealth. He said, how many men your age are in better shape than you? How many men don't have a gambling problem? You don't have a gambling problem. You don't have a drinking problem. You don't have this. You've overcome this. He just made me realize in a very short conversation all the positive things that I have in my life. And he also asked me a question, Penny, that I think is really interesting. He said, who do you compare yourself to when you think of your financial situation? And I said, well, I compare myself to this person. And he said, who do you think of when you compare yourself, say, health-wise, physical, body-wise? And I said, well, I think of this person. He said, okay, who do you think of when you think of in terms of a father, being a good father or being a good grandfather? And they were all different people, and he said to me, you pick out the person in your life who's the absolute best at one thing. And that's who you compare yourself to. But if we took the average of all those people, they would all say that you're better than they are. that they're only better than you in that one attribute. Like the guy that you think of who has more wealth than you, who has a better financial picture than you, what does his family look like?
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, well, he doesn't really have a family life. His health is terrible, but that's who I compare my financial life to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have, at least in my own mind, I find that helps me to think in terms of, to step back and look at my life in total, makes me feel like maybe I am more closer to what I would like to be. That, yeah, in every single aspect of my life, is there some way that I would love to get better? Yes. But when I step back and put it in perspective, it doesn't look nearly as deficient as when I'm needle focused right there, got my nose up against something saying, yeah, but so-and-so makes more than me, or yeah, but so-and-so's in better shape than me. Or when I'm making those narrow comparisons, I won't really stack up. But when I step back a minute and I look, it looks pretty good to me where I am today. And I think for someone like you, I've seen you do that same thing. I've seen you get in that narrow focus where you see something that you think is better, but you're looking at a little bitty narrow slice of one person's life and comparing it to the same narrow slice of yours and saying, look, their life is better. No, that narrow slice is better.
That's true.
And that's what feeds that feeling of being less than for most people. Shoot, I bet there's people listening to this right now that compare themselves to people on Facebook, and 90% of the stuff on Facebook they're reading that compare themselves to isn't even true.
Right.
Those people have terrible lives.
Well, I appreciate actually everything that you had just said. I know that you gave me an exercise in which I have posted affirmations around my house. And one of them was, I am enough. And then I added to that and I said, I'm more than enough. And so I also, in learning from you and in learning to overcome my less than story, and also working on fueling my positive and fueling my cookie jar and helping the listeners with action steps to be able to start transforming their lives. I love those two action steps, the fueling and looking for the positive. I do that through putting affirmations, around my house, on my refrigerator, in my work, on the visor of the car. And then to also, I guess I like your idea of the cookie jar. I never really thought of doing that specifically with other people's input. But I do an evening daily gratitudes journal. And so it was interesting when I first started doing that journal, it was actually pretty hard. I was grateful for the day. I was grateful for being alive. I was grateful for the roof over my head. And as you think about it every day and you start paying attention to your life, the little things get bigger. And it was somebody smiled at me today. Somebody gave me a compliment today, or I made an impact on somebody's world today, or I had a chance to talk to my dad who I haven't talked to in 3 months. And so my gratitudes went from just trying to put 5 gratitudes down or putting 5 things into your cookie jar every day, to now some days I have 8 and 10 and 15, and I'm almost having to stop myself. So I appreciate those action steps that you've given me.
And that activity that you're doing widens your perspective of the world.
It really does.
And
it makes you, I'm sorry.
It changes that feeling of less than to a feeling of being very blessed.
It does. And it also, for me, when I reflect on that exercise, every day I look for something that I can do to help someone else, or I want to do something that I'm proud of to be able to put on my gratitudes. Whether it's helping someone else or contributing somehow, or even getting the blessings from someone else giving you a gratitude. It really is amazing. You're right. The world opens up. And if you're in a less than mindset for that day, just writing down gratitudes, taking a 10-minute or a 5-minute or even a 1-minute break in your day and writing down a list of gratitudes, or adding those things to your cookie jar, as you say, from other people, that could change your entire mindset for the day. It's truly transforming.
You know, the cookie jar literally used to be something that I had to actually go into it and pull things out.
Mm-hmm.
And it is literally became for me, and I do still put stuff in an electronic folder,
Mm-hmm.
but I never have to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Just the thought, just the mere mental model of knowing I have a cookie jar, that I just think to myself, I need to go in the cookie jar. And that almost always, just that single thought clears that feeling of not enough almost immediately. Almost
Mm-hmm.
immediately, just the thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to go in my cookie jar. And then as soon as I say that, I know I'm enough.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, I don't even need to go to the cookie jar. And I'll tell you one other thing that I found very effective for me. I have, of course, you know this, I have all over my house, I am enough. And I also have, I love myself in a lot of places. And those two little sayings, which, you know, people often make fun of me for having them around, in that moment where I know I'm in a negative spiral and I need to stop a negative self-talk, and this happens less and less, because again, that once you start to use these tools, you train your subconscious that you're not going to do that. But when I have a moment that I'm sliding down that negative slippery slope of, oh, I'm not enough, nobody loves me, I think the whole world hates me, I better eat some worms. When I'm on that path, you know, people will often say to me, I don't know how to stop that. Here's what I do. I just, in my head, say, I love myself, 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 I love myself. And I create enough noise with by saying it out loud and putting enough emotion behind it, I create enough of a distraction that there's no bandwidth for the negative thought to exist. And I just say it until I overpower it with action. And again, when I first started that process of doing that, it might take me 4, 5, 6 minutes to make that go away. And I might switch from I am enough to I love myself, I love myself. I might go back and forth, but I was bound and determined not to let that negative self-talk get in there and start me down a path I didn't want to live in. And now, just again, the simple reminder to myself that, you know, I feel like I say to my subconscious mind, don't make me chant this, because I will if I have to. I just remind myself, I am enough. I do love myself. And in that moment, then, it really just passes. It becomes just a thought, not something that, I know I've used this term, like, that's a thought. I'm not enough. It's just a thought. It's not true. Just like I want to kill someone when they cut me off in traffic. It's just a thought. It doesn't make me a murderer. The thought that I'm not enough is just a thought. It's not who I am. But if I pick it up when it goes across my brain, oh my gosh, that makes me feel like I'm not enough. If I pick it up and play with it, it gets bigger. It gets emotion. It starts to pull in all that history and all those other times. And now you're starting to pile data on top of it and emotion on top of it. That's the moment for me when I have to cut that off. Like, I can't allow that to go forward. That's when I use the I'm enough, or I love myself, or the cookie jar to just stop it. Because I don't want that to go back into memory with more emotion than it had when it came out. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes me think of two things actually when we were talking about that. First off, it's like training a muscle.
Hmm.
Whether it's for singing, your singing voice, or whether it's for an athlete or your muscle, meaning your brain. If you train your muscle over and over again, then it just automatically knows what to think and do. So like you said, when you start going down that rabbit hole, your brain kicks in and just stops it.
Yep, your
And
subconscious takes over.
right, takes over. And so the more we practice, the more we train ourselves, the more we work on it, the more we write gratitudes, the more that's just second nature in our being and in our life. And that's what we manifest, because what we think and what we say and what we do, we manifest in our life. And
Yep.
if we think negatively, we're going to manifest negative activities and actions and responses. But if we think positive, and success, and I am enough, and I love myself, and I'm more than enough, then you manifest that in your world. And that's who and what you become, really.
The largest bias that our brain is hardwired with is what's called confirmation bias. We all look for data that supports what we already believe. And people talk about confirmation bias on the internet or on a YouTube video. They always talk about it in a negative light. But if you think about it, once you turn the corner, confirmation bias works in your favor. When you believe you're not enough, you look everywhere for the data that says I'm not enough. And it's everywhere. You can find data to support you. And that's all you see.
Mm-hmm.
But once you turn the corner,
Mm-hmm.
once you begin to believe that you are enough, that you are worthy to be loved, then confirmation bias works in your favor. It's what you're getting out of your gratitude journal. Now, your confirmation bias at the end of the day is that I am enough and I am blessed. And not only am I blessed, I should be blessing others.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when you have a day, as you go through your day, you're looking for gratitude points. You're looking for the data that supports your new mindset, which is that you are enough. And it's
Absolutely.
everywhere as well.
Mm-hmm.
And all that data was there all along.
Mm-hmm.
We just ignore the data that doesn't agree with our belief. And we only focus on the data that supports us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like you've turned the corner when your confirmation bias begins to work in your favor, driving you towards the life you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know my story, and my story was easily confirmation biased on the negative. When I was a little girl, there was an event that happened that I basically told myself I wasn't good enough, and everything that happened in my
After
life
that,
basically, could say that I wasn't good enough until I was 50 years old. And I went through an exercise and basically was able to identify that, drop it, let the walls come down, peel off the onion, whatever you want to call it. And man, that was transformational for me. So there are people out there that have lifelong I'm not enough recordings going on in their head. And whether it's been a lifelong or it's been a particular moment in time, those are the people through this Less Than movement and this Less Than series we want to help affect.
I feel like you're one realization away from having a different life. You know
Thank
what I
you.
mean?
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's that way for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Once you understand what's holding you back,
Mm-hmm.
and you realize it's not true and it's not real,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's almost universal. I
That's
think
true.
for me, one of the most powerful things about understanding that feeling of not being lovable and not being enough was that those two fears are really almost two sides of the same coin, and that they're universal.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not the first person to be in this situation to feel those two things. I just don't hear anybody talk about it much.
Right.
And as soon as I started to talk about it, every single person I talked to confirmed that they have it, that it's really bad, and that they don't do anything about it
Mm-hmm.
except stew in it and let it get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like for those people that are out there thinking, well, it's all good for Chuck, he has a great life, of course he feels like he's enough. Well, that's not how it works, and you know that.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in your life changed the day before you felt like you weren't enough. The next day you felt like you were enough,
Mm-hmm.
and you still have the exact same life.
Right.
It has nothing to do with your circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with your situation. It has nothing to do with any of the things you think it has to do with. It all centers on how you frame your life in your own head.
Yep. What
And
happens in between here?
And as simple as that sounds, it's not easy to make that conversion. I think when I say that, people say, well, Chuck's saying you should just change your mind and you'll have it. I am saying that, but I'm also want to recognize it's not as easy as just saying it once. You have to actually work at this.
Mm-hmm. That's
Like
very true. That's very true. When I go back and I look back over the last 2 years to see where I was to where I've come, and I don't necessarily do everything that I've done over the last 2 years still every day. But there was probably 20 different things in my life. Many of them you recommended, of course, and you know that I've worked on over the last 2 years. But there are some things that you find that work for you that I think keep you going every single day, that you do need to do every day or every week to keep that foundation and to keep that sense of grounding. You know, I know a morning routine for me, now that I've got a morning routine, it might be waking up and doing meditation, doing some gratitudes in the morning if I didn't do it in the evening, but usually I do it in the evening. Also some prayer time for me, my exercise moment, my dog time. I have set up a morning routine that sets me up for success, sets me up for peace, and allows my brain to be in the right frame of mind to handle the day. And so there were things that I've done before in the last 2 years that I no longer do. But partly because maybe the brain is already programmed. But there are definitely daily routines and weekly routines that I still continue to do, not speaking properly, in order to continue that growth and that movement. And I think that's part of being human, is that we're always going to have life. Life is going to happen every single day. And what we learn and how we learn to handle that is what changes us and what changes our perspective.
It's important to understand that even when you're getting great coaching, even when you're reading a good book, even when you're picking up someone else's great process for feeling like you're enough or feeling loved, you're reading someone else's process. You're reading the breakthrough they had. They're talking about what worked for them. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get discouraged because Penny's process doesn't work perfectly for you. What you have to understand is that's Penny's process. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things, like you said, that we did together, you outgrew those. You don't need those anymore. You grew to a different problem. Mm-hmm. Some of those, right. But some of those we set aside because you said they just didn't work. Mm-hmm. Well, they either worked for me, mm-hmm. or they worked for someone else I coached. And mm-hmm. so I gave them to you to try on. Mm-hmm. But you didn't like them. Mm-hmm. Either they didn't fit, you didn't like the color, you didn't like the way they fit, or something. They didn't feel good on you, and so you quit doing those. I think it's important to understand if you suffer from this feeling and it causes issues in your life, you need to get over it. And you're not going to be successful anywhere else in your life until you beat this thing. Mm-hmm. This is generally the lid on your life. If you're going to do that, you have to seek out what's going to work for you. Now, What's worked for most people is a good place to start. But if that doesn't work for you, modify it, change it, find something. Don't just say, well, there you go, that penny stuff didn't work. Modify it. You know, you talk about morning routines. It's funny. I used to coach with Jason Roberts, and we both would tell people you need a morning routine. My morning routine is very quiet. I like quiet time. I like to meditate. I like to contemplate. I like to read. All very quiet. And I would prefer as much solitude as I can get in the morning. Jason's method of morning ritual was to go downstairs, excuse me, play headbanging music, jump up and down on the trampoline using the Tony Robbins method, and scream his affirmations at the top of his lungs. Now, both methods work, but his works for him.
Right.
They would not work for me. And so,
well, yeah, I see that. I also see something just as simple as like our body clocks. I am not a morning person when it comes to getting up at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock and being highly productive and being at the gym, like you were saying, and being outgoing. Yet there are individuals that have that type of schedule, and I'm not that schedule. So you're right. It's taken me years to figure out what works well for me, not only in an act or an activity, but also the time of day that works well for me. Something as simple as, for me, working out between 9 and 10 a.m. works really, really well. I find I have the most energy for my workout between those hours of my day. If I shift till earlier or later, the energy level has decreased. Now, that doesn't mean over time that I couldn't change my mind, which is my muscle, to adjust my workout. But at the same time, why should I, when I'm able to make that schedule work and it's the best time during my day, but it may be 5 a.m. for somebody else's day, or 6 p.m., you know, as far as just something as simple as that.
It's funny, Penny. I personally believe that most people work out in the morning because that's when their willpower is the highest. I find that as you build your mindset capabilities, as you become more mentally tough and your tenacity goes up, and your ability to command your life in a way that you choose to, you don't have to. I don't have to work out first thing in the morning anymore. But when I was young, I did, because if I waited, I just would skip it. It was the one time in the morning. And now, reading all the neuro research, I realize that that's when your willpower is the highest. When I first get up in the morning, that's when I'm going to make my best decisions. That's when I'm going to be as close to plan as I'm going to be. And as I wear down over the day, my ability to make good decisions, choose water over soda or carrots over cookies or whatever, however you want to frame it, work out or skip it, that diminishes over time. So for many, many people, they work out early in the morning only because they found that's the only time they have the willpower to push themselves to do something that they know they need to do, but they really maybe don't want to. And I think for you, it's just not true. You don't need that now. And so you're able to say, no, I'll just do it when I want to do it. So I would say if you, especially if you find that you struggle with feelings of being less than late in the day, realize that your ability to persevere diminishes over the day as it gets worn out. And understand, if that's what's happening, those processes we talked about really have to become ritualistic.
That's a very good point.
Because that, in that moment, you may not have the willpower, the discipline, the perseverance to coach yourself through it. But if you set up a process that forces you to remember the things remind yourself, then that ritual will save you when your willpower won't.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chuck, we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and being on the show today, and ask if there's anything in closing that you would like to share with our audience.
You know, Penny, it's a joy for me to see you be successful. It's a joy for me to see you changing other people's lives. I know you understand this, but that's what's in my vision, is to empower people like yourself to take their mess and create a message that speaks to the world. And so for me to be on your show today is especially touching to me, because
Thank you.
It means that my vision is true. And I love that. And so I just appreciate being on the show today. And I hope that through your work, we can eliminate this feeling of not being enough, because I feel like every human being is worthy of respect. Every human being is worthy of self-respect. And I feel like all of us are intrinsically worthy. In and of ourselves, just being human should be enough to be worthy and be lovable.
So, well, thank you so much, Chuck. You're humble, and always I appreciate your wisdom and your vision and your grace. So for everyone who's listening to the Penny Z Show, another fantastic guest interview, and have a transforming day.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to hear more, including specific ways to empower yourself, go to thepennyzshow.com.